Hey guys, how you going? So this is the first video that I'm doing, so as a recap of rowing. So I'm assuming you've already done the balls at this point. So I'm just going to get the balls that we've pre-made. Just going to give it a little bit of time. And just kind of zone out, kind of be here, check out the garden, that sort of thing. I've got my bucket for water, I've got my sponge, and a couple of bits of tools, the needle tool, maybe I should do it a bit closer, needle tool, and your wire. And that's kind of really all you would need, as well as this tool here. We'll use that as well. Anyway, so here we go. I'll turn my wheel on. Get nice and close. Make sure you've got your towel sitting around your knees. Nice and close up to the wheel so your legs are hugging the wheel here. You've got your bucket underneath, catching all the slops. We're just going to throw the piece into the middle of the wheel. Give it a couple of taps on the side, not on the top, on the side. So giving it on the side. Right, then I'm going to put the wheel on full speed. And I'm not going to touch the wheel for a little bit actually. It's going to be full speed for a while. So I'm going to get a little bit of water in my hands, or you can get it in a sponge if you'd rather. Either or is fine. Now, either way, I'm going to show you the two different methods. I'm going to lock in my elbows and I'm going to push from this part of my hand, so the bottom two fingers and this part here is what's touching the clay. So I'm locking in my wrists and holding my elbows into my body. So I'm sliding the clay up. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this part of my hand and I'm just going to add a little bit more water. Remember the clay's got to slip through your hands, so there's got to be a nice amount of water. And all I'm doing is putting this part here and this part here on top of the clay. The rest of your hand can rest on the clay, but it's not touching it. It's not touching it. It's not putting any force on it. So you can touch it, but just don't put force on there. So I've gone down again. And I'm going to come back up again. So again, these two parts and this part of your palms, and I'm pushing in, the clay is coming up, and then I'm just gliding my hands up to the top of the piece. A bit more water again, and then again, just this part of my hand. I'm pushing over, I'm not pushing down, I'm pushing over. So I'm pushing over, and as I do, this part here, my thumb and my finger are together, and this part here is over the top of the clay, so you're not creating a little point. Now, if you create something like this, and you've got, it's sort of like a mushroom, you're pushing too far on the top and not enough across. Now I'll show you again the difference. The difference is pushing this way as opposed to straight on the top like this, okay? When you push straight on the top, it's actually a lot harder to hold that position as well. So again, I'm going to just use these two parts of my hand. I'm pushing up, gliding my hands along. Now my left hand kind of supports my right hand so that it keeps us nice and steady. Again, this part, thumb, finger together, and I'm pushing not on the center but a little bit off towards me. At about 6 o'clock, I'm pushing down. Now if you want to, you can grab this bit of tooling and clean up the sides just so you can see a little bit better what's going on. And I'm going to keep doing that, and then down, up, and down until I feel that it's centered. Now it needs to be centered, remember, at the bottom and the top. So if it feels nice at the top, but then down the bottom, I can feel a bit of a wobble here, so it's not quite centered. So I'm going to show you the other method that is also really helpful if you're doing a bigger piece of clay and centering it. So I'm going to use this part of my palm, and I'm basically pushing the clay towards the window. Now, at the same time, my other hand is over the top of the wheel and sort of gripping onto the edge of the wheel. And my forearm is sitting in this little spot of my hand. And it gives us a little bit added extra oomph. Now when it does that, you don't need to use as much force. So I'm going to push towards the window, so which is this way. And as I do that, my hand's going to glide up the top of the piece of clay. Again, I'm going to do what I did before, and I'm going to push down on this part of the clay. My thumb and my hand are together, there's no gaps. And I'm just pushing down slightly. Now this gives us a lot of extra power, so you don't need to use as much. So again, I'm pushing forward, my hand's gripping the side of the wheel. I'm pushing forward that direction, and I'm gliding my hand up the piece, nice and steady, pause, and then I'm going to go, again, it's on at about 6 o'clock, but it's just off to the center, and I'm going to push it across and down. So forward, glide it up, then down. Now each time that you let go of the clay, pause, and it's a gentle let go. If I was to do this and then quickly let go, you can see how the clay really goes out of balance there and right off center. So again, every time we do it, go down, pause, off. If you feel like it's too hard to do in one movement, just do it in two. So pushing up to the top, pause, off, down, pause, off. Once you get a bit more fluid with it, it's one movement. So it's up and down, up and down, up and down, until this piece of clay is nicely centered. And you just choose which method feels right for you. You might watch a few more videos of other people doing it and find another way that suits you better. Okay? If as you go along you want to clean this up again, feel free. And then once you feel like it's centered, make sure that it's in this sort of a shape. So it's kind of like a half dome shape. Alright? When you're about to put the center in your piece, just make sure that you're not doing it wider than what the edges of this piece are. Okay? So, to do the hole in the center, and then to pull up on your piece. So that's what we're going into now. Now we've got the V here in your hand. I'm getting my middle finger and I'm just pushing straight down onto the piece. My elbows are locked in again, the same position as it was before. The left hand's not touching your clay, it's sitting off the clay a little bit. My left hand and my right hand are kind of pushing into each other so that it creates a nice steady sort of situation there. So nothing's really moving, we've got nice steady hands. And I'm going to use my middle finger and I'm just going to push down on this part of my finger. I'm not pushing straight down and I'm not pushing flat, but I'm just going to push a little bit on an angle. Now I've got quite stumpy fingers, but if you want to, you can get your index finger and go onto the middle finger, or your ring finger and do it the same if you need some extra power. I'm just going to use my middle finger. So my middle finger is push straight down into the clay. Now as you do that, the clay is going to be quite dry, so you're probably going to need to keep adding a little bit more water. Now as you do it, remember that as you go along, you want to keep testing how deep your piece is. So to test how deep your piece is, get the pointy tool, and you're going to push down until the needle hits the wheel, and then you're going to get your finger and you're going to push down on the needle until it touches the top of the clay, and then you'll know how deep your piece is. So I'm going to push down, get my finger, and so at the moment it's about this deep. What we want it is really about half of that, about a centimetre. So I'm going to keep doing it again, full speed on the wheel, middle finger, creating that V, locking in my elbows, and I'm just going to push down. Again, I'm going to pause. Each time I take my hands off the clay, it's a pause and a gentle take off. Putting the needle tool in, bringing it out, and it's about, so my hands are all getting caught up in there. And if you can see, it was about that deep. Hopefully you can see that okay. So it's about a centimetre, so that's perfect. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to pull out on the piece. So I'm going to decide how wide this piece is. Now when you're beginning, remember that a lot of the time you'll make your piece unintentionally wider than you start with. So to start off with, just keep it a bit narrower. Now as I'm doing it, I'm again creating that V, my middle finger is in the middle of the V, my left hand and right hand are opposing forces, so that my left's pushing up to my right's pushing down on my left. My elbows are locked in, my hands are hovering above the piece again, and my right middle finger is just going to pull out on the piece, so it's on the bottom of the piece and it's pulling towards me directly. You may need to again add some more water, because each time you're opening up the clay it's going to be drier. Okay, so there we go. I've opened it up to the width that I want it to be. Now once we've done that, we need to compress the base. So compressing the base, again my left hand and my right hand are opposing forces, but doesn't really need to be as strong as before. My left hand's holding there, my middle finger goes from about 3 o'clock into the centre, hold it, come off, and you repeat it about 5 or 6 times. This is going to help stop the base cracking. So again, I'm holding it here, my elbows are tucked in like before, out to 3 o'clock, into the centre, pause, come off. Again, 3 o'clock, into the centre, pause, come off. I'm just going to repeat that a few more times. You're putting a little bit of pressure on the piece, but not enough so that you're creating like a dip. You don't want to make the piece any thinner at the base than what you've already just checked it to be. So off we go. Pause and come off. All right. So as we're doing this, I've not taken the speed off full so far. So we keep it on full speed. I'm going to show you the other angle of this piece a bit later on, and I'll go through the same sorts of instructions and show you from the top angle. But this is just from the view that you can see that's full screen. All right, so the next piece we're going to pull up on the piece. So what you're going to use this part of your knuckle, and you're going to use the 2 middle fingers on your left hand. And basically what you're doing, it's this motion. So you're going to push in with your knuckle, pull up on the piece, pause at the top, come off. Okay? So this hand, my left hand, is really just sitting on the inside of your piece. It's not pushing at all. All it's doing is holding it so that that wall doesn't move when I push in on it with my knuckle. So I'm going to lean over. So anytime that we're using the clay and manipulating the clay, just remember it's not a movement like this with my hands. It's a movement over my body like this. So again, I'm going to lean over my body. My elbows are tucked in nicely. My right one's tucked into this little nook. This one's a little bit higher up because I have to do that to get over to the piece. So I'm really going to push in with my knuckle at this point, and you can see that the piece is starting to rise. As that happens, and as I move my 2 fingers up the piece, I'm taking the speed off the wheel. Now when I get to the top, I'm going to pause at that spot, take my hands off, and then I want to compress the rim. Now to compress the rim, it's your pointer finger and your thumb, and you're going to push that on the top of the rim, and then your right finger is just putting onto the middle of that gap, just like that. You're not pushing down on the piece and you're not squeezing. You're just holding it there, and this finger is just going to sit on the top like that, so that it's basically just pushing out any inconsistencies in the clay. So I'm going to push that in and hold down onto that piece. Now sometimes you might end up with a little bit of clay coming off, and that's fine. That just goes into your slops. There was a little bit of clay that needed to come off that piece as I pulled off. Okay, it should feel nice and smooth. There shouldn't be any wobbles on the top. If there is wobbles, I'll go through that in a later video on how to fix that up. So again, I'm going to go full speed onto the wheel, knuckle in, and as that hand comes up the piece, I'm going to slow down the speed of the wheel, come up to the top of the piece, pause, come off. Then when I get to the top here, I'm going to compress the rim, now if you get a piece that is over like that, you're pushing too hard on the rim, okay? I'm just going to fix that up again. So again, I'm going to push in with my knuckle, slowly come up the piece, speed off the wheel, pause at the top, come off the piece, and then again compress the rim. Now basically I'm going to continue that until this piece gets to the height or the width that I'd like it to be. I might just do one more on this just for purposes of showing you guys. One more, pushing in, light off the wheel, light, 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 up to the top, pause. I'm going to come off nice and slowly. Again, I'm compressing the rim. Now before I decide to take this piece off, I want to make sure that the base here is trimmed. So I'm going to trim the piece here. Now as you trim it, I like to use this angle of the piece, because when you use this pointy end, a lot of people to start with especially seem to dig into your piece. You don't want to do that. We want to just create a nice smooth edge. So as you push this tool onto the base of the wheel, then you're going to push this across into that little corner here, just on a bit of an angle. So you're going to angle it sort of in this direction. As you do, then you want to push this part into the piece and make sure that the clay comes off. You don't want to push the clay up. You want the clay to come off if there needs anything to be trimmed off. Okay. The reason for that is if the clay gets pushed up the piece, then it'll create wobbles and balances, and it will put your piece off center basically, because you're adding clay to the outside. So which means that there's more chance of it cracking, air bubbles, that sort of thing. So I'm just going to put my 2 fingers again on the inside of the piece. My thumb is balanced on my right hand just to give it a little bit more stability. And I'm just angling the tool onto the piece. And as I do it, it's catching the clay here. So there should be clay coming off and onto your piece that you'll put into your slops bucket. I'm just going to do it again and create it a little bit thinner. And now I'm just going to finish it off by coming up to the top of the piece. It just helps create a nice smooth edge. Just going to compress the rim again. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to get rid of any water that's inside your piece. So grab a sponge. You can use the one that come in your kits, or I just get one of the big sponges and cut it up into small bits, because I find sometimes these are a bit too thick and not as maneuverable. Sometimes you want something a little bit thinner. So I use these little numbers. Now I've still got the wheel spinning. It's on about mid-speed at the moment. Just sitting this into the bottom of your piece. If you find at this point there is a little bit of inconsistency on the bottom, you can push down with that sponge and just even out the base. Not too hard, but just a little bit of pressure, and that will give you a nice inside flat surface. All right, so all the water's out of the middle there. I'm just going to also, because remember we're not trimming the top of your piece, so I'm just going to use this little bit of sponge and I'm just going to lightly go over the rim of my piece. Now if there was a lot of water on my piece, I would also lightly go over with the sponge up the piece right up to the top, having my finger on the inside to help support it. And then I'll probably just go around the rim one more time. Okay, so now we're going to take the speed off the wheel, get a little bit of water. If your water at the front here has a lot of clay in it, so it's more slip than what it is water, you might need to just get a little bit of fresh water, because sometimes it makes it harder. So I'm going to put a couple of splashes. Just put it on one side, on the far side of your piece, not everywhere else around. I'm going to get my wire tool and I'm basically going to move it so that the water pulls and comes underneath your piece. So as I do it, I'm just going to pull a little bit of water, and sometimes in one motion, sometimes it takes two, is to come under your piece. You might need a little bit more water. Come up, under again, and just move your piece across. Now, sometimes you might need to give it a little upward pull on the wire just to help nudge it along. You don't want to give too much that you're going to cut into the piece, but just a little bit to help nudge it along. You might need a little bit more water on the far side again, and just go until you come off the piece. Now I'm going to tuck the two little wire bits in my wheel, and I'm going to just be really careful. I'm going to move my towel out of the way, and I'm going to get a backing board, which I've just got to get one there. Actually, I might just do it onto one of these. It depends what you've got, it's totally up to you. And I'm going to turn the wheel around so that I've got enough room to get in underneath it. Now there's a few different ways that you can do this. One is that you can have your two fingers and go either side of your piece, or you can do it with your thumb and your finger. Or another way that you can do it is just give it a little push and it can sit on the palm of your hands. One of the most important things is to make sure that your hands are dry. So give your hands a little dry if you haven't already done so. And I'm just going to put that there, balance it. Maybe we'll just balance it there for now. And just push your piece over, rest it on your fingers, get rid of the wire if you need to, and then just push your piece onto the board so that it's ready for drying. There you go. We'll go through a few other bits and pieces in other videos.